I was the quiet kid who everyone thought was a human punching bag. The guy who sat in the back of the class with my head down. But they had no idea that I spent my summers in a remote temple in the mountains of China, training 16 hours a day under the brutal discipline of Shaolin monks. The day they pushed me too far wasn't just a mistake for them. It was the moment I finally broke my vow of silence and showed the entire school exactly what a weakling is capable of when he's been trained to kill with his bare hands. I am standing here now, looking at the legal papers and the expulsion notices, and I have to ask you honestly, if you had been tormented, spat on, and physically assaulted for 3 years while holding back the power to end it in seconds, would you have stayed peaceful, or would you have let the monster out like I did? Tell me, was I wrong for finally defending myself, or did they get exactly what they deserved? My story doesn't start in that high school hallway. It starts when I was 7 years old and my father, a man obsessed with traditional discipline, sent me away to live with my uncle in Hunan province. While most kids were playing video games or learning how to ride bikes, I was waking up at 4 in the morning to carry buckets of water up stone stairs using only my fingertips. I learned the art of kung fu not as a sport, but as a way of life. I learned how to breathe through pain, how to harden my shins against solid wood, and how to see a strike before it was even thrown. Every morning, the mountain air would be so cold it felt like breathing needles, but the master would say that the cold is just another teacher. I spent years perfecting the iron shirt technique, letting my peers strike me with bamboo poles until my skin felt like leather, and my nerves were deadened to the sensation of impact. By the time I was 16, I had calluses on my knuckles that looked like stones and a sense of calm that most adults couldn't dream of. I could balance on a single wooden post for 6 hours without blinking, my mind wandering through the internal landscapes of my own spirit. But when I returned to the States to finish my senior year of high school, my father made me promise one thing. Never use what you learn to hurt others. You are a monk in spirit, and a monk does not seek conflict. I took that vow seriously. I showed up to Lincoln High wearing baggy hoodies to hide my physique, and kept my eyes on the floor. To everyone else, I was just the weird Zen kid. I remember the first day clearly. The lockers were a maze of noise and aggression, and I felt like an alien who had landed on a hostile planet. My muscles were tight, ready for a threat that hadn't appeared yet, but my mind was chanting the mantras of peace my master had taught me. I tried to blend into the shadows, but in a place like Lincoln High, being quiet is like wearing a neon sign that says target. That's when I met Tyler. Tyler was the crown prince of the school, the captain of the wrestling team, and a guy who thrived on the fear of others. He saw my silence as a challenge. It started small, tripping me in the cafeteria, knocking my books out of my hands, the usual cliché movie bully stuff. But because I never reacted, because I just took it with a blank expression and went back to my meditation, it drove him insane. He didn't realize that my blank expression was actually me performing internal breathing exercises to keep my heart rate from spiking. He thought I was a coward. By the second month of senior year, the bullying turned physical. He and his friends would corner me in the locker room and practice their wrestling takedowns on me. I let them slam me into the mats because, to be honest, their impact felt like a feather compared to the iron palms of my masters back at the temple. But the humiliation was starting to burn. I was a lion pretending to be a sheep, and the sheep were starting to bite. I remember one specific afternoon in the gym locker room when the air was thick with the smell of old gym socks and cheap deodorant. Tyler grabbed me by the collar and slammed me against the cold metal lockers. I could have broken his wrist in 3 places with a simple twist, but I stayed limp. I watched his pupils dilate with a sick kind of joy as he saw what he thought was fear in my eyes. His friends stood around, laughing, filming it on their phones, hoping for a reaction I refused to give. They called me the human rug. And for a while, I let myself believe that staying a rug was the most honorable thing I could do. I even had a nickname for the pain. I called it the Red Ghost. Every time Tyler hit me, the Red Ghost would try to whisper in my ear, telling me to strike back, to show them the speed I possessed. But I would just close my eyes and visualize the mountain stream near the temple, cold and unyielding, flowing around the rocks. As the weeks went by, Tyler's obsession with me grew. He couldn't understand why I wouldn't break. He started escalating, trying to find my trigger point. He would pour milk on my head in the lunchroom, or find my locker and spray paint "Coward" across it in bright red letters. My teachers saw it, but they looked the other way because Tyler was the star athlete, the one who brought trophies to the school. I felt completely isolated. One afternoon, I was in the library trying to study when Tyler and his goons surrounded my table. He grabbed my notebook, filled with my personal translations of ancient Taoist texts, and began ripping the pages out one by one. Each tear sounded like a gunshot in the quiet library. He laughed as the delicate calligraphy fluttered to the floor like dying birds. "Why do you write this garbage?" he sneered. "No one cares about your fake deep philosophy. You're just a loser who's too scared to look me in the eye." I kept my gaze fixed on the table, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the wood. I was counting my breaths. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. If I hadn't been a practitioner of the internal arts, I probably would have started shaking. Instead, I stayed as still as a statue. This infuriated him more than any insult could have. He leaned in, his breath smelling like sour energy drinks, and whispered, "I'm going to find out what you're hiding, Zen boy. Everyone has a breaking point, and I'm going to be the one to shatter yours." One Tuesday, things took a dark turn. I was sitting under a tree during lunch, practicing a specific form of moving meditation, when Tyler and his crew walked up. He didn't just mock me this time. He grabbed the prayer beads I kept in my pocket, the ones my master gave me after I completed my final trial. He laughed, called them girl jewelry, and snapped the string, letting the wooden beads scatter into the dirt. As I knelt down to pick them up, he kicked dirt into my face and told me that if I didn't fight back like a man, he was going to start targeting the freshman girl I usually sat with in the library, a quiet girl named Sarah who reminded me of my sister. That was the first time my pulse actually quickened. I felt the chi rising in my chest, that heat that starts at the base of the spine and flows into the fists. I looked him in the eyes and said, "Please do not do this. You have no idea what you are asking for." He just laughed, spat on my shoes, and walked away, promising that tomorrow would be the day I finally cry. The beads were more than just wood to me. They represented a decade of suffering and spiritual growth. As I crawled on my knees, picking them up one by one from the mud, I felt a part of my soul hardening. The monk was still there, but the warrior was beginning to wake up from a long, forced sleep. I realized then that my father's promise was a heavy burden, perhaps too heavy for a world that didn't value peace. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, the broken beads heavy in my pocket like lead weights. So that is the situation I found myself in. Trapped between a sacred vow of nonviolence and the burning need to protect the innocent from a predator who thought I was nothing. I spent that entire night in my room, not sleeping, but holding a horse stance until my legs shook, trying to find my center. I stared at the wall for hours, visualizing every possible outcome. If I fought, I would be a monster in my father's eyes. If I didn't, Sarah would suffer, and Tyler's ego would grow until he truly hurt someone. I felt the weight of my ancestors watching me, judging my hesitation. I practiced my strikes in the dark, the sound of my fists cutting through the air like whip cracks. I was fast, faster than I had ever been, fueled by a righteous indignation I couldn't suppress. Before I tell you about the absolute carnage that happened in the gymnasium the next day, I want you to pause right here. Stop and think. If you had the ability to end a bully's reign of terror with a single move, but you knew it would change your life forever, would you keep your promise or would you break it? Comment below right now, and tell me what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have let him break Sarah's spirit, or would you have broken his bones? Is peace worth more than justice? Tell me your thoughts before we get to the part where everything changed. The next day, the tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a blade. It was the day of the all-school pep rally in the gym. The entire student body was packed into the bleachers, and the wrestling team was doing a demonstration in the center of the floor. Tyler was the star of the show, tossing his teammates around and basking in the applause. I was sitting in the very back, trying to disappear. But Tyler had a plan. He grabbed the microphone and looked straight at me. "Hey Zen boy, why don't you come down here? We need a dummy for a demonstration of a double-leg takedown. Come on, don't be a coward in front of everyone." The whole gym started chanting, "Zen boy, Zen boy." I felt Sarah's hand on my arm, her eyes wide with fear. I stood up. My hoodie felt heavy. As I walked down the bleachers, every step felt like I was walking toward a cliff. I stepped onto the mat, and the smell of sweat and rubber hit me. Tyler whispered in my ear, "I'm going to break your ribs today, and everyone's going to watch." The coach blew the whistle. Tyler lunged forward with everything he had, expecting me to fall like a sack of bricks. But something shifted. The monk in me stepped aside, and the warrior took over. Without even thinking, I pivoted on my left heel, a movement so fluid it looked like I had disappeared. Tyler slammed face first into the mat where I had been standing a millisecond before. The gym went silent. He scrambled up, face red with rage, and swung a massive, unrefined overhand right at my temple. I didn't flinch. I slipped the punch, my hand moving like a snake, and delivered a palm strike to his solar plexus. I didn't use full power. If I had, he wouldn't have breathed again, but I used enough. He doubled over, gasping for air, his eyes bulging in shock. His friends, the other wrestlers, saw their leader falling and they didn't care about the rules anymore. 3 of them rushed me at once. This was the Undercover Monk, coming out in full force. It was like a choreographed dance, but with the speed of a lightning strike. I used the Drunken Master sway to avoid a tackle, then transitioned into a tiger claw to redirect the second guy's momentum, sending him flying across the mat. The third guy tried to grab me from behind, but I dropped my center of gravity, grabbed his arm, and performed a perfect shoulder throw that sent him crashing into the scoring table. I could feel the adrenaline, but my mind was icy cold. I wasn't angry, I was precise. I was an instrument of physics and ancient geometry. The entire gym was on its feet, but nobody was cheering. They were staring in absolute, terrifying awe. People were recording on their phones, but the lenses couldn't even capture the blur of my movements. One of the wrestlers tried to get up and throw a chair at me, but I caught it midair with one hand and set it down gently, never breaking eye contact with Tyler. It was a display of dominance that didn't require blood. But Tyler wasn't done. His ego was shattered, and he was dangerous. He finally regained his breath and pulled a folding knife he'd been hiding in his gear bag. He screamed and charged. This wasn't a school fight anymore. It was a life-and-death situation. The crowd gasped, a collective sound of horror that echoed against the high gym ceilings. I saw the steel flash in the overhead lights. He swung wildly, the blade missing my throat by inches. I didn't wait. I closed the distance in 2 steps, performed a crescent kick that knocked the knife out of his hand so hard it embedded itself in the wooden bleachers, and then I stopped. My fist was hovering exactly 1 inch from his nose. I could feel the wind from my strike ruffling his hair. He froze, shaking, the realization finally hitting him that I could have ended him at any moment over the last 3 years. I didn't hit him. I just leaned in and said, "The beads you broke belong to a man much more dangerous than me. Be grateful I am the one you met today." I turned around and walked out of the gym, the silence following me all the way to the parking lot. I didn't go to my car. I walked 3 miles to a nearby park and sat by a pond, finally letting the tears fall. I had broken my father's promise. I had used my hands for violence, even if it was necessary. The peace I had cultivated for years felt fractured. I spent hours there, watching the ripples on the water, wondering if I could ever go back to being the person I was. I felt like the mountain I had climbed in China had suddenly crumbled beneath me. I looked at my hands, the hands that had just dispatched 4 athletes without breaking a sweat, and they looked like weapons to me. I hated them. I wanted to be the boy who carried water, not the boy who broke people. The next few days were a blur of police statements and school board hearings. My phone wouldn't stop blowing up. The video of the gym fight had millions of views within 24 hours. People were calling me the real-life Karate Kid and the monk of Lincoln High. But I didn't feel like a hero. I sat in my room, the curtains drawn, listening to my father pacing downstairs. He hadn't said a word to me since I got home. The school had placed me on an indefinite suspension while they investigated the extent of my training. They were actually afraid that I was a liability, that I was a trained weapon disguised as a student. Tyler's parents were threatening to sue, claiming I had used excessive force, even though their son had pulled a knife on me in front of 500 witnesses. It was a mess. But then things started to shift. Other students began coming forward. They told stories of how Tyler had bullied them, how he had extorted money, and how he had physically harmed people for years while the school looked the other way. The victim narrative Tyler was trying to build started to fall apart. Sarah was the most vocal of them all. She testified to the school board about the threats Tyler made against her, and how I had stepped in to protect her. She told them that I never started a single fight, and that I had taken months of abuse without ever raising a finger. The aftermath was a whirlwind. I was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing, but the school environment was permanently poisoned for me. When the video of the fight went viral, showing Tyler pulling a knife first, the school board couldn't ignore it. Parents were outraged that a student had a weapon, and the focus shifted from my assault to the culture of bullying Tyler had created. Tyler was expelled and faced criminal charges for the weapon and the attempted assault. His friends were kicked off the team. As for me, the school became a different place. People didn't pick on me anymore, but they didn't talk to me either. I was a ghost, a legend they were afraid of. I would walk down the hallway, and the crowd would part like the Red Sea. It was a different kind of isolation, and in some ways it was worse than the bullying. Sarah was the only one who came to see me. She brought me a new string of beads, not the ancient ones from the temple, but simple wooden ones she had made herself. She told me I saved her from a nightmare, and that for the first time, she felt safe at school. My father finally sat me down a week later. He looked older, his eyes weary. He simply nodded and told me to start my meditation from the beginning. He said, "A sword that is never drawn is just a piece of metal, but a sword that is drawn to protect becomes a tool of heaven. You did not seek the fight sought you. Now you must seek the peace again." I never went back to that school to graduate. I went back to the temple. I realized that the undercover life wasn't for me. I needed to be where my skills were respected, not tested by those who don't understand the weight of violence. I spent the next year in silence back in Hunan, scrubbing floors and practicing my forms until my body felt like it was made of light again. I realized that the true test wasn't the fight in the gym. It was the year of silence that followed. I had to forgive myself for breaking the vow. I had to understand that being a monk isn't about being passive. It's about being purposeful. I eventually returned to the States and opened a small school for at-risk youth. I don't teach them how to fight so they can win trophies. I teach them how to breathe so they don't have to fight at all. But I also make sure they know how to defend themselves, because the world isn't always a temple. Sometimes, the world is a gym filled with bullies, and you have to be ready for that too. I learned that true strength isn't about how much you can destroy, but how much you can endure before you choose to act. I also learned that some people only understand the language of strength, and sometimes, you have to speak their language so they can finally hear the message of peace. Looking back, I don't regret the strikes I threw, but I do mourn the loss of my anonymity. I can never be just the quiet kid again. I am the boy who knew the secrets of the mountains, and I carry those secrets with me every day and every step I take. If you've ever been the underdog, just know that you have a fire inside you too. Just make sure you control it before it controls you. Don't let the world turn you into a victim, but don't let it turn you into a monster either. There is a middle path, a way to be both a lamb and a lion. It took me a long time to find it, but now that I have, I'm never letting go. Like this video if you were on my side and think I did the right thing. Subscribe for more stories like this, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far? Or was that the perfect lesson? Should I have just let him hit me one more time to keep my vow? Was the destruction of my prayer beads worth the revelation of my secret? I'll see you all in the next story.